It is that time of year again, folks. It is back to school season, and this time of year always gets me feeling nostalgic. So today, we are going to be playing with some markers and talking about my old school days. Hi, Shanna Rowe Jackson here, also known as Caution Artist at Play, and today I am going to be having a little story time. This is a little different from my channel, but we're going to be having fun. We're going to be playing around with some of the Ohuhu markers, some of their fine liners, and their bleed-proof paper. Thank you, Ohuhu, for sending me these beautiful supplies. And I am going to be talking about my good old days in school. And I will also be illustrating some of my favorite icons from when I was growing up. And yes, I'm getting old. I grew up in the 90s and early 2000s. Thankfully, that aesthetic is in style right now, and I'm here for it. So I am going to be doing that while I talk about when I was growing up. So I'm going to be working on the Ohuhu double-sided bleed-proof marker pad. This is a little smaller than an 8x10. Nice, smooth paper, and it's supposed to be completely bleed-proof. We will see just how bleed-proof it is later. And let's just get the sketch down. Oh, I love it. I'm so excited. And I have here a set of 120 of their Honolulu markers. And they are the ones that have the brush nib and the bullet nib, because I am not a fan of chisel nib. And so that is what I am going to be working with today. And then later on, I will be working with some of their fine liners. And as you can see, I have just drawn out a bunch of fun stuff from my childhood. Now, granted, some of these things predate my childhood, such as the cassette tape, but when I was really young, that's what we listened to when we wanted to listen to music. We used to record our favorite songs from the radio onto the cassette tapes and make our own mixes. And then obviously I have some green slime here. I was a Nick kid. I watched Nickelodeon a lot when I was a child. And then I have things like Pogs and the beaded hair ties. Gel pens became very big when I was in my teens. The yin yang and the girl power, a lot of these symbols also predated my childhood, but we had a huge resurgence of 60s and 70s fashion when I was growing up. And so obviously, like the yin yang, the peace sign, things like that, those were kind of big when I was a child as well, even though they definitely predated my childhood. So you're going to see some of those symbols as well. And some of these are just things that are from personal memories from my own childhood. And of course, you're going to have a nice mix here between 90s and 2000s. Like those butterfly clips. Oh, baby. Everybody had those butterfly hair clips in the 2000s. And so it's just it was a fun time to grow up, honestly. But things were a lot different back then. We saw a huge rise in technology. So I grew up in a time where computers were not as big as they are now. We had a computer lab. We didn't each have our own laptop computer for school. And cell phones didn't really become a thing until I was a teenager. And even then, not everybody I knew had one. And when we texted, we had to do like the number thing. Like we didn't have texting the way we do. So even the cell phones that we had, they didn't give us as much access to the internet or to the world like what we have now. And so times were definitely different. Digital art, for instance, was not something that was a huge thing when I was growing up. And so I mention all of this because access to different kinds of resources was different back then. You had to go to the library to look things up. You had to handwrite your reports. And that also meant that in order to do art, you had to have some sort of physical art supplies on hand in order to do so. And so because of this, I think that's one huge reason why I come from a traditional art background, because technology just wasn't what it is today. And it's been really exciting, honestly, growing up and being able to see such a shift in technology and to see how far we've come. And the fact that I'm able to talk to you right now through the internet and post videos of my artwork is really kind of a dream come true for the little 90s girl in me. I have mentioned in a previous video that when I was really young, up until the age of about 10 to 12, my family didn't have a ton of money. And I went to a school that was a pretty small school where everybody knew everybody. And if you didn't have money, or if you weren't skinny, or if you were too skinny and short, like I was, which didn't help with the poor kid image that they put on me. Or if you didn't have a good home life in general, or if you didn't play sports, you got picked on quite a bit in the school that I went to when I was younger. Now, I moved away when I was about 12, and that's the school that I moved to was a whole different, ball game, folks. But growing up in an environment like that can be really tough on anybody who is even slightly a little bit different. And so I didn't really excel socially in my younger years. Other than when people would see me draw, I became known as the art girl. I would never really reach out a lot when I was in school. I had my group of friends, but I was pretty quiet and I was very nervous. I was such a nervous child. I still deal with anxiety, and as a child, it was much worse. And between getting picked on and just other general stress, here are the fine liners, just so you know, I didn't really connect a lot. Like I said, I had my group of friends, but it was difficult for me to connect even with teachers. But one teacher that stands out the most to me is, of course, my art teacher. My art teacher was somebody who, she could be a little bit tough because she took art seriously. And even though we were just in grade school, she was really good about teaching us real principles of art. And you could tell that she really cared. And a lot of kids didn't take art class seriously. And I think she knew that I did. I didn't have a lot of exposure to art when I was a child. There are creative people in my family, but no painters. There's people who like to write and crochet and things like that. But I never even went to my first art museum until I was about 19 and a family friend had taken me. And so I didn't have a lot of exposure to art other than things like Bob Ross on Channel 10 and just me playing around with the art supplies I had on hand. And of course, I didn't have a lot of money, but I did have like crayons and some of the kids' art kits, with the watercolors and the ones that everybody hates nowadays. I had those, and I would practice all the time when I was at home. I would sit there and mix skin tones, and I would teach myself how to mix colors, and I'd paint landscapes and watercolors. And I think that my grade school art teacher really picked up on that. And even though I was the quiet one, and I was not somebody that most people thought anything of back then, other than I think some of the teachers maybe even pitied me a little bit because, again, I was such a nervous child. This is the first teacher that really made me feel seen. And I think that is very important. I think it's one of the things that this is where educators can really make a difference in the world of a child. You can have a really bad educator, and I know I've seen stories online about art teachers who have been so discouraging that people didn't pick up a pencil again until they were 20. And fortunately, this art teacher was not like that for me. I did have a pretty nasty art teacher in 7th grade when I moved to my new school. But by then I was like, lady, I already know I'm into art. So she wasn't able to discourage me the way she tried to. We'll just put it that way. But my art teacher, she was the art teacher all the way up through, I think, until junior high. Maybe she was even the junior high art teacher. But my memories go as far back as elementary school with her. And she was the first person who taught me that art could be worth something. And this is something that will always stand out to me. As I mentioned, I would paint a lot when I was at home. I spent a lot of time creating art. Now, don't get me wrong, it was the 90s, so I was outside with my neighborhood friends a lot, but I would be bringing my sketchbook with me. I always wanted to be an artist, and I was always trying to get better at it. Again, I think this teacher saw that in me, and one of my favorite memories of all time in school is when she took me aside and she asked me if she could basically barter with me. She had me bring in some of my artwork from home, and she said she wanted to hang it in her living room, and she was giving me art supplies in exchange for my artwork. And that is how I got my first ever tubed paint. It was either acrylic or watercolor. I don't remember now, but I was so ecstatic. I remember it distinctly. One of the colors was yellow ochre, and she gave me tubed paint for my little watercolor paintings that I did using probably something that was less expensive than Crayola at the time. It was not, I couldn't even tell you what the paintings were. I do think they were landscapes because I was really into landscapes then, but I like to do portraits a lot too. But in my little mind, she had traded me real big girl art supplies for my artwork and told me that my artwork was beautiful and she wanted to hang it in her home. And that has stuck with me for the entirety of my life. She was the first one who made me feel like my art was worth something more than just my favorite thing to do, and that I was worth something and that I could do something with this. And that might be where my art supply obsession has come from. Now, don't get me wrong. My parents were very supportive and they did the best they could with what they had. And so it's not like I didn't have things on hand to create with, but they were, you know, just regular kids' art supplies. Until I got older, of course. But of course, I also got really good at creating with what I had on hand. And I would create with things that weren't even technically art supplies. Like I used to go in and I would, my dad's carpenter pencils, those were always fair game for me. I don't know if he knew it, but like anything I could get my hands on that would make a mark, I was creating. And honestly, I think growing up without a lot of money does make you more innovative. And so I'm not knocking that at all. But to have another adult in my life that is not a family member, a stranger essentially, she's a teacher, but she's not from my family, be like, your art is beautiful. I want it on my wall. Here is something worth money for your time and for your artwork. That really was kind of life-changing for me. I already knew that I wanted to be an artist. It's all I've ever wanted to be. But that kind of encouragement really helped me keep going in some of the toughest times in my life. And I did have some pretty tough times not long after that. And I was going through tough times then. And so she was kind of that beacon for me. And I will never forget her for that. And this is why I think it is important to recognize those teachers. Yes, you are going to have some that really shouldn't be teaching, but there are some beautiful people out there that change the lives of children, and she was one of those for me. Look at this. There is no bleed on this paper. This is crazy. There was a little bit on the edges from where it went over, but nothing actually bled through the page. And here is my final illustration. Man, it really has me in the feels. I'm feeling so nostalgic. I love the bright 90s colors. And of course, I had to do the background in some Lisa Frank vibes with those rainbowy colors. And these markers were perfect for that. I enjoyed doing this thoroughly. The paper is great. The markers are great. The fine liners are great. If you have watched this far, I would love to hear one of your favorite memories from school. So let us know in the comments below. All right, folks, that's it. I had so much fun with these markers, and I had a fantastic time reminiscing and going back to my childhood. I hope that you enjoyed this too. I wanted to let you know that Ohuhu has a back-to-school sale going on. I will link the materials in the description below if you are interested. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you next week. Bye.